In the heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and luxury was a way of life, there stood an upscale restaurant named the Golden Chandelier. It was a place where the city's wealthiest and most influential gathered to indulge in fine dining, exquisite wine, and the unspoken privilege that came with their status. The restaurant itself was a masterpiece. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, velvet curtains framed large windows overlooking bustling streets, and soft classical music played in the background, setting the tone for elegance. Among the staff who kept this world of opulence running smoothly was Clara Johnson, a young African-American woman whose quiet strength and grace made her stand out even in such a grand setting. At just 26 years old, Clara had already faced more challenges than many people twice her age. Born and raised in Harlem, she grew up in a modest household, helping her mother care for her younger siblings after their father passed away unexpectedly. Work was not new to Clara. It was woven into the fabric of her life. But despite the hardships, she carried herself with dignity, always wearing a warm smile that lit up the room, even if no one stopped to notice. Clara's role at the Golden Chandelier was simple: serve food, refill drinks, and ensure every guest felt like royalty. And while some patrons treated her kindly, others barely acknowledged her presence, speaking to her only when they needed something. To them, she was invisible, a pair of hands carrying plates or pouring water, nothing more. Yet Clara never let their indifference shake her. She knew her worth, even if they didn't see it. Her real sanctuary wasn't within the gleaming walls of the restaurant, but in the small apartment she shared with her family, where she spent hours playing the piano late into the night. Music was her escape, her voice, her joy. It was also her secret. One chilly autumn evening, as golden leaves swirled outside the restaurant's windows, a man entered who would change everything. His name was Charles Whitmore, a wealthy industrialist known for his sharp suits, sharper tongue, and insatiable ego. Charles was a regular at places like the Golden Chandelier, where he could bask in the admiration of those around him. He thrived on being the center of attention, often boasting about his business ventures or making cutting remarks to assert his dominance. Tonight, however, he seemed particularly restless, scanning the room with a bored expression, until his gaze landed on Clara. Charles tilted his head slightly, studying her as though she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. There was something about her demeanor that intrigued him, not fear, not subservience, but a quiet confidence that didn't align with his expectations. Determined to test her, he waved her over with a flick of his fingers. Clara approached, politely balancing a tray of empty glasses in one hand. "Yes, sir?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. "You," Charles began, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "Do you know how to play the piano?" He gestured toward the gleaming grand piano tucked in the corner of the room, its polished surface reflecting the glow of the chandeliers above. Clara hesitated, unsure where this was going. Before she could respond, Charles continued, "I imagine someone in your line of work must have picked up a few tricks here and there. Why don't you give us a little show?" His tone was light, almost playful, but there was a cruel edge beneath it. This wasn't a genuine request, it was a challenge, a way to assert his superiority. Around him, his companions chuckled, clearly amused by the idea of a waitress attempting to entertain them. Clara felt the weight of their stares, the subtle sneers, the assumption that she wouldn't dare, or worse, that she couldn't possibly succeed. But Clara wasn't afraid. She had spent her entire life navigating spaces where she wasn't welcome, proving time and again that she belonged. So instead of shrinking under Charles's mocking gaze, she straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Of course, sir," she said softly, placing the tray on a nearby table. "If you'd like me to play, I'd be happy to." The room fell silent as Clara walked toward the piano, each step deliberate and steady. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some curious, others dismissive. No one expected much. Perhaps a clumsy attempt at a nursery rhyme or a disjointed melody. Certainly not anything remarkable. As she took her seat at the piano bench, adjusting her apron and resting her hands lightly on the keys, Clara allowed, herself a brief moment of reflection. This wasn't just about proving Charles wrong. It was about reclaiming a piece of herself, showing the world that she was more than what they saw. And then, with a deep breath, she began to play. As Clara sat down at the grand piano, the air in the room grew heavy with anticipation. Charles Whitmore leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smug grin plastered across his face. His friends exchanged amused glances, clearly expecting nothing more than a clumsy attempt at entertainment. To them, this was just another example of Charles flexing his power, putting someone beneath him in their place. But Clara didn't share their amusement. Instead, she focused on the keys in front of her, letting the moment settle before she began. Her fingers hovered over the ivory and ebony keys for a brief second, as if she were gathering her thoughts, or perhaps summoning the courage to reveal a part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. The truth was, music had always been Clara's refuge. Growing up in Harlem, she'd spent countless hours teaching herself to play on an old upright piano at her church. It wasn't much, some of the keys stuck and the soundboard hummed faintly. But it was enough. For Clara, the piano became a way to escape the struggles of daily life, a language through which she could express emotions too deep for words. She never imagined that one day, those same skills would be called upon under such scrutiny. Finally, her hands descended gently onto the keys, and the first notes rang out into the silent room. At first, the melody was simple, a soft, tentative tune that seemed almost hesitant. It was as though Clara was testing the waters, gauging how far she could push herself without losing control. But even in its simplicity, there was something undeniably beautiful about the music. Each note carried a weight, a story, a fragment of who Clara was beneath the surface. Some patrons glanced at each other, surprised by the unexpected sweetness of the sound. Charles, however, remained unimpressed, at least outwardly. He raised an eyebrow, shifting slightly in his seat, still convinced that this was all just a prelude to something laughable. But then, something extraordinary happened. Clara's playing shifted. What started as a gentle, uncertain melody transformed into something breathtaking. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, dancing across the keys as if they had a life of their own. The music swelled, filling the room with rich, emotive tones that seemed to resonate deep within everyone present. Clara had chosen to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece she had practiced tirelessly during quiet nights. When the world felt overwhelming, the Nocturne was known for its delicate balance of melancholy and hope, a reflection of the human spirit's ability to endure hardship while yearning for beauty. As Clara played, every note seemed to echo her own journey, the struggles of growing up poor, the loss of her father, the countless moments when she had been underestimated or dismissed because of her race or gender. Yet woven into the sadness was resilience, a quiet strength that refused to be broken. The transformation in the room was palpable. Patrons who had initially chuckled or whispered among themselves now sat motionless, captivated by what they were hearing. Waiters paused mid-step, trays forgotten in their hands. Even the kitchen staff peeked out from behind the swinging doors, drawn by the hauntingly beautiful music. For a few minutes, the luxurious restaurant faded away, replaced by something far greater, a shared experience of awe and wonder. Charles, for his part, couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Gone was the arrogant smirk, replaced by an expression of genuine astonishment. He had expected mediocrity, maybe even failure, a chance to mock Clara and reinforce his superiority. Instead, he found himself confronted with undeniable talent, the kind that couldn't be faked or dismissed. Every note Clara played seemed to strip away his defenses, forcing him to confront the ugliness of his earlier assumptions. Here was a woman he had judged solely based on her job and appearance, only to discover that she possessed a gift far beyond anything he could have imagined. As the final notes of the Nocturne lingered in the air, the room remained utterly silent. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as though time itself had paused, allowing everyone to fully absorb what had just transpired. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. At first, it was hesitant, almost reverent. But soon it grew louder, more enthusiastic. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, their admiration evident. Clara sat quietly at the piano, her head bowed slightly, her chest rising and falling with the effort of holding back tears. She hadn't played for applause or recognition. She had played because she needed to, but the response overwhelmed her nonetheless. Charles, still seated at his table, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words eluded him. Never in his life had he experienced such a profound sense of humility and shame. He had walked into the restaurant that evening intending to assert his dominance, to remind everyone around him of his importance. Now he realized how small and insignificant he truly was compared to the woman sitting at the piano. For the first time he understood the true meaning of grace, not the kind that came with wealth or status, but the kind that radiated from within. When the applause finally died down, Clara stood up slowly, smoothing her apron and nodding politely to the crowd. She returned to her duties without fanfare, picking up her tray and resuming her work as though nothing remarkable had happened. But the atmosphere in the restaurant had changed irrevocably. The patrons who had once overlooked her now watched her with newfound respect. Her colleagues whispered excitedly, congratulating her whenever they passed by. And Charles? He sat silently, staring at the empty space where Clara had just been, grappling with emotions he couldn't quite name. That single performance had opened a door none of them had expected, one that would lead to changes none of them could foresee. The applause had barely faded when the weight of what had just happened began to settle over Clara. She returned to her duties, moving through the restaurant with the same quiet efficiency she always did, but inside, her mind was racing. The room still buzzed with energy, patrons leaning toward one another in hushed tones, their faces alight with admiration and disbelief. Some glanced at her as she passed, their eyes wide with respect, while others whispered behind raised hands, speculating about who she really was and how such a remarkable talent could have gone unnoticed for so long. For Clara, though, the moment wasn't about fame or recognition. It was deeply personal. A rare opportunity to reclaim a part of herself that she had kept hidden for years. Music had always been her sanctuary, a private joy she shared only with her family and close friends. Playing in public, especially under such circumstances, had felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Yet, as terrifying as it was, there was also a sense of liberation. For once, she hadn't held back. She had let the music speak for her, and in doing so, she had revealed a truth far more powerful than any words. She was not defined by the uniform she wore, or the assumptions others made about her. Meanwhile, Charles Whitmore remained rooted in his seat, unable to shake the unease that had settled over him. His earlier bravado was gone, replaced by a gnawing discomfort that pressed against his chest. He replayed the scene in his mind, the mocking tone he'd used to summon Clara, the smug certainty that she would fail, and then the jaw-dropping realization that he had been utterly wrong. Every note she played had stripped away layers of his arrogance, exposing the ugly prejudice beneath. He glanced around the room, noticing how everyone seemed transformed by the experience. Even his own companions, who had laughed along with him earlier, now avoided meeting his gaze. They clapped awkwardly during the performance, but their enthusiasm felt forced, almost guilty. Charles knew they were thinking the same thing he was. What if we've all been wrong about people like her? It was a question he couldn't ignore. Throughout his life, Charles had prided himself on being a man of influence, someone whose opinions carried weight. But tonight he realized how little he truly understood about the world beyond his gilded bubble. He thought back to all the times he had dismissed waiters, maids, drivers, people whose labor made his luxurious lifestyle possible, as nameless, faceless servants. Now, sitting here listening to the echoes of Clara's music in his mind, he wondered how many other hidden talents and untold stories he had overlooked. As the evening wore on, Charles found himself watching Clara closely. She moved gracefully, between tables, refilling glasses and clearing plates as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Her composure was remarkable. She showed no trace of anger or bitterness, even after being subjected to his mockery. If anything, she seemed calmer, more centered, as if performing had given her a renewed sense of purpose. Charles couldn't help but admire her strength, though the word admire felt inadequate to describe what he was feeling. It was something deeper, something closer to awe. Finally, unable to sit silently any longer, Charles signaled for Clara to approach his table again. When she arrived balancing a tray of empty dishes, he cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Johnson," he began, his voice quieter than usual. I owe you an apology." Clara paused, her expression unreadable. She set the tray down gently on a nearby chair and looked at him directly. "An apology?" she repeated, her tone neutral but firm. "Yes," Charles said, fidgeting with the edge of his napkin. "What I said earlier, it was disrespectful. I assumed things about you based on nothing meaningful. And I was wrong. Very wrong." The sincerity in his voice surprised even him. Charles wasn't accustomed to admitting fault, let alone apologizing publicly. But something about Clara's demeanor demanded honesty. She didn't flinch or interrupt, simply waited for him to continue. "I hope you can forgive me," he added, his gaze dropping briefly before returning to hers. "You have a gift, one that deserves to be celebrated, not mocked. I'll make sure people know that." Clara studied him for a moment, her dark eyes searching his face. Then slowly, she nodded. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Whitmore," she replied. "But forgiveness isn't mine to give. What matters is whether you mean it, and whether you'll remember this moment the next time you're tempted to judge someone unfairly." Her words struck a chord deep within Charles. He opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss. How could he argue with her logic? She was right, of course. An apology was meaningless unless it led to real change. And yet he couldn't deny the sincerity of his regret, or the determination growing within him to do better. As Clara turned to leave, resuming her work without another word, Charles sat back in his chair, lost in thought. He realized that this encounter was more than just a lesson in humility. It was a turning point. For years he had built his identity around wealth and power, believing that success entitled him to look down on others. But tonight, Clara had shown him a different kind of power, one rooted in resilience, dignity, and the courage to rise above cruelty. Word of Clara's performance spread quickly throughout the restaurant. By the end of the evening, nearly every patron had heard about the waitress who silenced the room with her piano playing. Some approached her directly, offering compliments or asking if she performed elsewhere. Others tipped generously, leaving notes of encouragement alongside their bills. One elderly couple even invited her to join them for coffee, eager to learn more about her background and musical journey. Clara accepted their kindness graciously, touched by their warmth, but she remained grounded. She knew that fame was fleeting and she wasn't interested in chasing it. What mattered most to her was using her talent to inspire others, to remind them that greatness could emerge from unexpected places. By the time the restaurant closed for the night, Clara felt both exhausted and exhilarated. As she hung up her apron and slipped into her coat, she reflected on the events of the evening. The applause, the compliments, even Charles's apology. All of it was gratifying, yes, but it wasn't the reason she played. She played because music gave her a voice when words failed, because it connected her to something greater than herself. And tonight, she had shared that connection with others, proving that art has the power to transcend boundaries and heal wounds. Outside, the city pulsed with life, its streets alive with the hum of traffic and the glow of neon lights. Clara stepped into the cool night air, her heart full and her spirit light. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Little did she realize that her performance had set off a chain reaction, one that would ripple far beyond the walls of the golden chandelier and touch lives in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The days following Clara's unforgettable performance at the golden chandelier brought a whirlwind of changes, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed that magical evening. Word of her talent spread like wildfire, fueled by whispers among patrons, glowing reviews on social media, and even a local newspaper article titled "The Waitress Who Stole the Show." What started as an impromptu piano recital quickly became the talk of Manhattan, drawing attention from people far beyond the restaurant's usual clientele. For Clara, life suddenly felt different, busier, brighter, and yet more complicated. Customers began requesting her presence not just to serve them dinner, but to play the piano during their meals. Some came specifically to hear her perform, booking tables near the grand piano to ensure they had front-row seats. At first, Clara was hesitant about this newfound fame. She hadn't played publicly to gain attention. It had been an act of defiance, a way to reclaim her dignity after being mocked. But as she saw how her music touched others, how it brought smiles to strangers' faces and sparked conversations about art and resilience, she couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose growing within her. Her colleagues at the restaurant rallied around her, offering support and encouragement. Maria, one of the other waitresses, often joked, "Clara, you're going to put us all out of a job if you keep stealing the spotlight." But there was no jealousy in her tone, only pride. Even the head chef, a gruff man named Mr. Delaney, who rarely spoke to anyone outside the kitchen, made it a point to tell Clara, "You've got something special, kid. Don't let anyone take that away from you." As Clara embraced her role as both waitress and musician, Charles Whitmore found himself grappling with his own transformation. That night at the restaurant had left an indelible mark on him, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and the world he lived in. For years, he had coasted through life, relying on his wealth and status to shield him from introspection. Now every decision he made seemed tinged with new awareness. He began questioning things he had once taken for granted, the assumptions he made about people, the privileges he enjoyed without thought, the invisible barriers he had helped uphold. Determined to make amends, Charles decided to take action. He reached out to Clara a few days after their encounter, asking if they could meet for coffee. Clara agreed, curious about what he wanted to say. They met at a small cafe near the restaurant, its cozy atmosphere a stark contrast to the opulence of the golden chandelier. Over steaming cups of coffee, Charles explained his plan. He wanted to sponsor Clara's first public concert, providing the resources and connections needed to give her talent a wider platform. "I know I can't undo what I did," Charles admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "But I want to do something meaningful, to show that I'm serious about changing. Your music deserves to be heard by more people, and I'd like to help make that happen." Clara listened carefully, weighing his words. She appreciated the gesture, but she also knew better than to trust blindly. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her tone measured but firm. "Is it because you genuinely believe in my talent, or is it because you feel guilty?" Charles hesitated, then sighed. "Honestly, it's probably a bit of both," he confessed. "I won't lie, I feel terrible about how I treated you. But hearing you play, it opened my eyes. You reminded me that talent and greatness aren't defined by where someone comes from or what they look like. If I can use my position to help someone like you shine, then maybe I can start making up for some of the harm I've caused." His honesty impressed Clara. While she didn't forgive him entirely, trust wasn't something she gave easily. She recognized the sincerity in his intentions. After some deliberation, she agreed to let him help, setting clear boundaries along the way. "This isn't charity," she told him firmly. "If we're going to do this, it has to be a partnership. My music is mine, and I won't compromise it for anyone, not even you." Charles nodded, understanding her stance. "Of course," he said. "You're in charge. I'm just here to support." With Clara's blessing, Charles threw himself into organizing the concert. He rented out a prestigious venue downtown, hired professional sound technicians, and arranged for promotional materials to be distributed throughout the city. He also insisted on keeping the event accessible, ensuring tickets were affordable so that people from all walks of life could attend. It was a small step toward addressing the inequalities he now saw so clearly, but it was a start. As the date of the concert approached, excitement built steadily. Posters featuring Clara's name and photograph appeared in shop windows and subway, stations accompanied by glowing descriptions of her story. Local radio hosts interviewed her, asking about her journey and the message she hoped to convey through her music. Clara handled the attention with grace, always steering the conversation back to the importance of perseverance and self-belief. "I'm proof that you don't have to fit into someone else's mold to succeed," she told one interviewer. "Just stay true to who you are, and opportunities will find you." On the night of the concert, the venue was packed. People of all ages, races, and backgrounds filled the seats, united by their curiosity and admiration for Clara. Backstage, Clara took a few deep breaths, trying to calm her nerves. This was a much larger audience than she was used to, and the stakes felt higher than ever. But as she stepped onto the stage, bathed in soft golden light, the crowd erupted into applause. Faces beamed up at her, full of anticipation and goodwill. When Clara sat down at the piano and began to play, the room fell silent once again. Her fingers danced across the keys, weaving together melodies that spoke of hope, struggle, and triumph. Each note carried the weight of her experiences, the challenges she had overcome, the dreams she still chased, the love and resilience that had sustained her. By the time she finished her final piece, tears glistened in the eyes of many in the audience, including Charles, who watched from the wings, overwhelmed with emotion. After the concert, Clara received a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Strangers lined up to thank her, sharing stories of how her music had moved them. Journalists clamored for interviews and offers poured in for future performances. Yet despite the accolades, Clara remained grounded. She knew that success wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about using her gift to inspire others and create positive change. For Charles, the concert marked the beginning of a personal journey. Witnessing Clara's impact reinforced his commitment to using his privilege responsibly. He began volunteering with organizations focused on racial equality and economic justice, donating both time and money to causes he had previously ignored. Though his relationship with Clara remained professional rather than personal, he respected the boundaries she set and continued to champion her work whenever possible. As the weeks turned into months, Clara's influence extended far beyond the concert hall. Schools invited her to speak to students about pursuing their passions despite adversity. Community centers hosted workshops inspired by her story, encouraging young artists to embrace their talents. And Charles, guided by Clara's example, worked tirelessly to dismantle the biases he had once perpetuated. Through it all, Clara never forgot where she came from, or the quiet strength that had carried her this far. Her journey was far from over, but she faced each new challenge with the same determination that had brought her to this moment. Little did she realize, however, that her story was just beginning to ripple outward, touching lives in ways she could scarcely imagine. In the months following her triumphant concert, Clara's life took on a rhythm she had never imagined possible. What began as a single evening of defiance at the Golden Chandelier had blossomed into something far greater, a career that allowed her to share her music with the world while inspiring countless others along the way. Yet, despite the growing recognition and opportunities, Clara remained deeply connected to her roots. She refused to let success distance her from the values that had shaped her: humility, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to lifting others up. Clara's concerts became events that transcended mere performances. They were celebrations of artistry, humanity, and hope, drawing audiences from all walks of life. Each show featured not only her breathtaking piano pieces, but also moments where she spoke candidly about her journey. The struggles she faced growing up in Harlem, the sacrifices her family made to support one another, and the quiet determination that kept her going even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Her words resonated deeply with listeners, many of whom saw fragments of their own stories reflected in hers. One particularly memorable performance took place at a community center in Brooklyn. The venue was modest compared to the grand halls Clara often played in, but the energy in the room was electric. Families sat shoulder to shoulder, children perched eagerly on their parents' laps. As Clara walked onto the stage carrying a small bouquet of flowers someone had handed her before the show began. "This is for all of you," she said, holding up the bouquet with a warm smile. Because tonight isn't just about me, it's about us. About what we can achieve when we believe in ourselves and each other. As she played, the audience swayed and clapped along, their laughter and cheers filling the space between songs. Afterward, Clara stayed late, signing autographs and posing for photos with anyone who wanted one. A young girl approached her shyly, clutching a worn notebook filled with scribbled compositions. "I want to be like you someday," the girl whispered. Clara knelt down to meet her eye level, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You already are," she replied softly. "Keep writing your music no matter what anyone says. It matters." These interactions fueled Clara's passion for giving back. She partnered with local schools and nonprofits to create programs aimed at nurturing young musicians, especially those from underserved communities. Through workshops, mentorship sessions, and free recitals, she sought to provide opportunities that she herself hadn't always had access to. For Clara, it wasn't enough to shine alone. She wanted to light the path for others to follow. Meanwhile, Charles Whitmore continued his own transformation, driven by the lessons he had learned through Clara's example. At first, his efforts to advocate for equality were met with skepticism. Many doubted whether someone like him, born into privilege, could truly understand the struggles faced by marginalized communities. But Charles didn't shy away from the criticism. Instead, he listened intently, educating himself about systemic inequalities and using his resources to amplify voices that had long been silenced. One of his most impactful initiatives was funding scholarships for aspiring musicians from low-income backgrounds. Dubbed the Clara Johnson Music Scholarship Fund, the program provided financial assistance, instruments, and training to talented individuals who might otherwise have been unable to pursue their dreams. When Clara heard about the scholarship, she was initially hesitant, concerned that it might come across as a gesture of charity rather than genuine support. But Charles reassured her, explaining that the fund was designed to honor her legacy while empowering future generations. Eventually, Clara agreed to lend her name to the cause, seeing it as an opportunity to extend her reach even further. The two maintained a professional yet respectful relationship, working together occasionally on projects related to the scholarship fund. While Clara still harbored some lingering mistrust toward Charles, she couldn't deny the sincerity of his efforts. Over time, their interactions softened, evolving into something resembling mutual respect. Charles often marveled at how much Clara had changed him, not just in terms of his actions but in the way he viewed the world. "Before I met you," he once told her during a meeting, "I thought success was about power and control. Now I realize it's about making a difference, however small." "That's progress," Clara responded with a faint smile. "But don't stop there. Keep pushing yourself to grow. That's how real change happens." As Clara's influence grew, so did her platform. She was invited to speak at conferences, appear on television shows, and write op-eds for major publications. In every setting, she used her voice to advocate for justice, equality, and the importance of embracing diversity in all its forms. Her message was simple yet profound. Everyone has value, regardless of their background or circumstances. Talent and potential exist everywhere. They just need to be recognized and nurtured. Her advocacy work extended beyond music too. Clara became a vocal supporter of workers' rights, speaking out against the exploitation and discrimination faced by service industry employees. Drawing from her own experiences as a waitress, she highlighted the dignity of labor and called for fair wages, safe working conditions, and greater respect for those whose contributions often went unseen. Her speeches resonated deeply with workers across the country, sparking conversations about how society treated its most essential, yet undervalued members. Despite her growing fame, Clara never lost sight of the people who mattered most to her. Her family. Every chance she got, she returned home to Harlem, sharing meals with her mother and siblings and playing the old upright piano at their church. These visits grounded her, reminding her of the love and support that had carried her through life's toughest moments. "No matter how far I go," she told her mother one evening, sitting side by side on the worn church pew, "this will always be my foundation." Her mother smiled, patting her hand gently. And no matter how high you soar, you'll always be my little girl. Don't forget that. Years passed, and Clara's impact continued to ripple outward. Young musicians inspired by her story began breaking barriers of their own, proving that talent knows no boundaries. Audiences around the world embraced her message of resilience and unity, finding solace and strength in her music. Meanwhile, Charles dedicated himself fully to dismantling the systems of inequality he had once perpetuated, becoming a trusted ally in the fight for social justice. Though their paths diverged over time, Clara and Charles remained linked by the shared history that had transformed them both. For Clara, the encounter at the Golden Chandelier had been a turning point, a moment of reclaiming her dignity and asserting her worth. For Charles, it had been a wake-up call, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths and strive for redemption. Together, albeit indirectly, they had sparked a chain reaction of positive change that touched countless lives. And yet, for all the accolades and achievements, Clara knew that true fulfillment came not from external validation, but from staying true to herself. As she stood backstage before another sold-out concert, gazing out at the sea of faces waiting to hear her play, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the people who had supported her along the way, and for the endless possibilities that lay ahead. Whatever the future held, she was ready to face it with the same courage and grace that had defined her from the start. Years had passed since that fateful night at the Golden Chandelier, and though the world had changed in countless ways, Clara Johnson's legacy endured as a beacon of hope and resilience. Her journey from a humble waitress to an internationally celebrated pianist and advocate for equality became the stuff of legend, a story told not just in newspaper articles or history books, but in living rooms, classrooms, and community centers across the globe. It was a tale of triumph over adversity, of talent rising above prejudice, and of one woman's quiet strength inspiring generations to come. Clara herself never sought fame for its own sake. To her, success was measured not by accolades or wealth, but by the lives she touched and the barriers she helped dismantle. Even as her concerts drew thousands and her name graced prestigious institutions, she remained deeply connected to the people who had shaped her life, the family who had supported her through thick and thin, the friends who had cheered her on during her darkest days, and the strangers whose kindness reminded her of humanity's capacity for goodness. One crisp autumn evening, nearly 2 decades after her debut at the Golden Chandelier, Clara returned to the very same restaurant where it all began. This time, however, she wasn't there to serve tables or play the piano under duress. She had been invited as a guest of honor to celebrate the restaurant's 50th anniversary, an occasion marked by speeches, music, and reflections on the establishment's storied past. Walking through the doors felt surreal, like stepping into a memory frozen in time. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled overhead, and the grand piano still stood proudly in the corner, though now it bore a small plaque engraved with her name, dedicated to Clara Johnson, whose music united hearts and changed minds. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement as patrons filled the room, many of them familiar faces from years gone by. Waitstaff moved gracefully between tables, their uniforms crisp and polished, while chefs prepared dishes infused with both tradition and innovation. As Clara took her seat at a reserved table near the front, she couldn't help but marvel at how much and how little had changed. The restaurant retained its elegance, yet the air felt lighter, freer, as if the weight of old prejudices had finally begun to lift. When the host called for everyone's attention, the room fell silent. A young woman stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, and introduced Clara with heartfelt admiration. Tonight, we gather not only to celebrate this restaurant's golden milestone, but also to honor someone who reminds us what true grace and courage look like, she said, her voice steady and warm. Please welcome the extraordinary Clara Johnson. Applause erupted as Clara rose from her chair, walking slowly toward the stage. Her steps were deliberate, each one carrying the weight of years lived fully and authentically. When she reached the microphone, she paused, scanning the sea of smiling faces before her. For a moment, she allowed herself to take it all in, the clapping hands, the proud nods, the tears glistening in some eyes. Then, with a deep breath, she began to speak. "I never imagined I'd stand here today," she admitted, her voice soft, but clear. "When I first walked into this restaurant so many years ago, I didn't dream of fame or recognition. I came here to work, to provide for my family, to carve out a piece of dignity in a world that often tried to deny it to me. What happened that night wasn't planned. It was an act of survival, a refusal to let someone else define my worth." Her words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Many present remembered the incident vividly, recalling how a single performance had shattered stereotypes and challenged assumptions. Others had heard the story secondhand but felt its impact nonetheless, inspired by the idea that art could transcend boundaries and heal wounds. "But this isn't just my story," Clara continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "It belongs to every person who has ever been told they weren't enough, who has faced discrimination, doubt, or dismissal because of their race, gender, or background. It belongs to those who have dared to rise above, to prove the naysayers wrong, and to remind the world that greatness can emerge from anywhere." She went on to thank the people who had supported her along the way, her mother, whose sacrifices had laid the foundation for everything she achieved, her siblings who had cheered her on even when times were tough, and her colleagues at the Golden Chandelier, who had stood by her side despite the challenges they all faced. She also acknowledged Charles Whitmore, who sat quietly in the back of the room, his expression thoughtful. Though their relationship remained complex, Clara recognized the role he had played in her journey, not as an antagonist, but as a catalyst for change. "Charles taught me something important," she said, turning slightly to meet his gaze. "He reminded me that growth is possible, even in the most unlikely places." His apology that night wasn't just about him, it was about opening a door for both of us to step through. And though trust takes time to build, I believe in the power of redemption. We are all works in progress, capable of learning, evolving, and becoming better versions of ourselves. Her words brought tears to more than a few eyes, including Charles's. He nodded silently, grateful for the acknowledgement, but humbled by the reminder of how far he still had to go. Over the years, he had worked tirelessly to make amends, using his influence to advocate for equality and justice. Yet he knew he would never fully escape the shadow of his past actions. Instead, he chose to live with them, as a reminder of where he had been and how much farther he needed to travel. After her speech, Clara made her way to the piano, taking her place at the bench as the room grew quiet once again. Her fingers hovered briefly over the keys as if savoring the anticipation before descending gently to begin. The melody that emerged was hauntingly beautiful, a blend of joy and sorrow, triumph and reflection. It was a piece she had composed herself, titled Legacy, written to encapsulate the lessons she had learned and the hope she carried for the future. As the music filled the room, memories flooded back for those who had witnessed her original performance. They recalled the shock, the awe, the realization that they were experiencing something extraordinary. But this time, the emotions ran deeper, enriched by the knowledge of all Clara had accomplished since that night. Each note seemed to tell a story, not just hers but theirs as well, woven together into a tapestry of shared experiences and collective growth. When the final chord faded into silence, the room erupted into applause. Not the polite, restrained kind, but a thunderous ovation that shook the walls. People rose to their feet, cheering and whistling, unwilling to let the moment end. Clara stood slowly, bowing her head in gratitude before turning to face the crowd. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her smile radiated pure joy. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter for Clara. While she continued to perform and advocate for change, she also began mentoring young artists, ensuring that her legacy would extend far beyond her lifetime. Schools named concert halls after her. Scholarships were established in her honor, and documentaries chronicled her journey, preserving it for posterity. Yet none of these achievements defined her as much as the simple fact that she had stayed, true to herself, refusing to compromise her values or silence her voice. For Charles, the evening served as a poignant reminder of how far he had come, and how much further he needed to go. Inspired by Clara's example, he redoubled his efforts to fight inequality, dedicating his remaining years to creating opportunities for marginalized communities. Though he never sought forgiveness, he found solace in knowing that his actions, however imperfect, had contributed to meaningful change. In the end, Clara's story was not just about one woman's rise to prominence, but about the transformative power of courage, compassion, and connection. It was a testament to the idea that no matter where you start or what obstacles you face, you have the ability to shape your destiny, and in doing so, to inspire others to do the same. As Clara walked out of the golden chandelier that night, hand in hand with loved ones, she knew she had left behind something greater than applause or accolades. She had left behind a legacy of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light can shine through, illuminating the path forward for us all.